So a warm welcome from my side to everyone who is joining in our webinar today. My name is Suna Karakas. I am the country director of the Hunger Project here in Germany. And I welcome you all to our fourth webinar this year. And today's topic is on women's empowerment, which we view as essential against poverty and hunger. And we reserved basically 75 minutes for our webinar talk today to allow some extra time for Q&A towards the end. And the topics we will discuss today are gender equality, women's empowerment, leadership, as well as give you some inside views on our program, specifically from Uganda and India. So our International Hunger Project colleagues will share their experiences directly with us. So therefore, I would like to welcome Irene Naikaali, who's the country director from the Hunger Project Uganda. Irene, if you can briefly raise your hand so we can see you. Great, welcome. And we have also Surbhi Mahajan. She's a senior communications officer from the Hunger Project office in India. Welcome, Surbhi. And yes, next to, of course, highlighting the topics of gender equality in India and Uganda, we would also highlight the role of the SDGs and the Agenda 2030, and also the role of Germany in advancing gender equality and women's rights. And for that, I'm very pleased to welcome also my colleague, Vincent Gründler, who's the Director of Advocacy at the Hunger Project Germany. So before I invite our speakers to engage with us, I would just like to get us started on putting the topic into a little bit of a context. So we have currently running the annual international campaign, which many of you probably know, the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. And we wanted to take the occasion to utilize this webinar and put our work with girls and women into the spotlight. And I think that gender equality is also a topic that affects us all. And at the most general level, when we say or talk about gender equality, we're talking about human rights and equal rights and opportunities for both women and men across a number of different dimensions, which we're hoping to highlight to you today. And apart from that, as you know, at the heart of our work at the Hunger Project is also our commitment, our own commitment to gender equality and to create safe spaces for women, for their participation in their societies and also in their economies. And what I would like to basically start us off with is also the fact is the global statistics from the UN World Food Programme, who also review gender indicators when it comes to looking at hunger and poverty. Let's take a look at some of the facts of what they say where we currently stand with women inequality. Because when we look at these numbers, we'll see once again that we are far away from reaching that reality. And how is gender or women's inequality really connected to the issues of hunger and poverty? So first of all, looking at statistics, these are statistics from the UN World Food Programme based on 2021 and 2022. So today we have over 60% of people who are affected by food insecurity are women and girls. And they also face a higher risk in facing hunger because nearly 2/3 of the world's countries, they are disadvantaged when it comes to food and access to food. And 150 million more women went hungry in 2021 than men when you look at the actual numbers. So that's a significant higher number. And when we talk about poverty, we also have to look at factors such as employment and income. And here we see that one of the reasons women are more likely to be poorer than men is also that their work tends to be usually underpaid or not paid at all, especially when it comes to domestic work. So on a global scale, women earn 23% less than men. And in some regions, although they make up more than 60% of the agricultural workforce, they only own 20% of the world's land. So it's a stark difference right here as well. And then when we look at the legal framework on the next slide, there we can also see what are the policies in place ensuring that women have equal rights. And also here we see a huge discrepancy because currently over half of the countries worldwide do not have proper laws in all key areas that ensure gender equality. Rights such as entering marriage or even deciding if you can have a divorce, just some of those very, very basic rights are currently not ensured in over half of the countries worldwide today. So, of course, when we discuss with Surbhi and Irene how this actually plays out in our programs in Uganda and India, we will bring this a bit more to life. But I just wanted to start us off with some of the information and facts that we see on gender equality today. And I would like at this point now to pass on to my colleague, Vincent Gründler, and who will basically introduce to us what role gender inequality plays when we talk about the SDGs and Agenda 2030, and also how Germany as a country is now working on gender issues and what policies they have put in place. And I think it's a very nice and positive development that we have seen so far here in Germany. So with that, I'll pass on to Vincent.
Yes, thank you. Marcel, if you can start my slides, wonderful, thank you. Yeah, welcome everybody. So it's, yeah, as Suna presented me, I'm the Director of Advocacy and Global Learning in the Hunger Project. And I'm with the Hunger Project for 39 years. So this quote that you see here from Hillary Clinton, then First Lady, at that time, I remember it very well, this event, which was very, very important for the world, and especially also for us in the Hunger Project at that time in 1995. The UN Women, the summit, World Summit on Women in Beijing, and everybody was expecting Hillary Clinton's speech. And when she said this, these were her first words: women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And there was roaring applause. Everybody stood up and for minutes applauded, because she, at that time, you have to remember, think back, the older ones in the audience try to think back, what was how was the situation on women's rights, on gender equality almost 30 years ago. And that was a very radical statement at that time. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit and put into perspective this the launching of the new strategy of the BMZ, so our Ministry for Development Cooperation, who launched half a year ago, more than half a year ago, the Feminist Development Policy. So it's actually the Feminist Foreign and Development Policy, but in the BMZ, they made their own launching event. And yeah, and we are not the first ones. Germany is only the, I don't know, 10th or 11th country in the world who launched feminist foreign policy and development policy. Others, or the first one was Sweden, more than 10 years ago already, and then Canada, Spain, and other countries. Next slide. And in the feminist development policy, we focus on 3 key areas known as the 3 R's. So the first one is equal rights, which means really giving women's rights especially a priority, but also, yeah, especially women's rights, which are also more than 40 years. We have a human rights treaty, especially on women's rights, which is reinforced and given more priority by the German government now. Access to resources is a key, as you all know, and Suna presented some facts around this. The lack of access to resources like income, like land possession, and health, basic health services, nutrition, and many other resources. Financial resources also important. There's a big gap. There's a big gender gap between access to resources for men and for women. And equal representation, of course, is something that also in the Hunger Project for more than 30 years, we put it as one of our priorities, and we will hear about it from our examples, as examples from India and Uganda, how we work on equal representation of women in the Hunger Project. So this feminist development policy is a big new commitment by the German government. But I have to say a but here. I have to use the word but because implementation is slow. I have been attending an event by the BMZ together with Venro, which is our umbrella agency from civil society, NGOs. More than 130 NGOs are organized under the roof of Venro. And this event 2 months ago, there was a very sober, quite negative balance after the launching, half a year after the launching of this feminist development policy. Very little has been implemented so far. Maybe the most challenging is the first point here, making development policy feminist. So by 25, more than 90% of newly committed project funds are to be channeled into projects that advance gender equality. And the main implementing agency of the German government, of the BMZ, is the GIZ, Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit. Und they are going slow. It is quite a revolutionary step to have the majority of the projects to be under this new policy framework. Yeah, next, please. So I want to counterbalance a little bit the sobering facts that Suna presented with the potential. So what does it really mean if we implement this strategy, if we also at the Hunger Project and with hundreds or thousands of other NGO partners, if we succeed in actually getting equal rights for women? Strong women need the potential. Here are some facts around this. No? So what does it mean? For example, we saw that 60% of, more than 60% in many African countries, not sure about India, more than 60% of the workforce in agriculture are women. So increasing by 30%, if women had equal access to agricultural inputs, agricultural yields would increase by 30%. And you see the other examples here. And also the last one here, 28 trillion additional US dollars in the global economic growth if women would enjoy equal participation. So the potential is very clear. Everybody would benefit hugely. The world would benefit, but also men would benefit hugely by equal rights for women. Next. Yeah, and let's put it in the context of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. So these are, as an overview, the 17 SDGs. And you see number 5, gender equality, naturally is the basic one when it comes to gender equality. But there are others. Next. And the whole SDG framework is really based on human rights. So 90% of the Agenda 2030 goals and the 169 targets. So under each goal, under each of the 17 goals, there are several targets, in total 169. And 90% of those are part of some human rights treaties. So there's a very direct relationship, and the whole Agenda 2030, this transformational agenda, social, ecological, and economical transformation agenda is based on the human rights and human rights principles like empowerment, equal opportunities, non-discrimination, transparency, accountability, participation. So you find all of this in the Agenda 2030. And I want to emphasize one of the main principles of one of the 5 principles of the Agenda 2030 is the leave no one behind principle. And that refers to minorities, to discriminated minorities, not only women, but many other, like indigenous people, like handicapped people, children, and so on and so forth. And then the main 3 SDGs referring to gender equality are number 5, number 10, where it's about reduced inequalities, and number 16, where it's about peace, justice, and strong institutions on all levels. We advocated for that before 2015, when the SDGs, where the Agenda 2030 was launched. We advocated for strong institutions on all levels, so including the local level. And that is in the formulation of SDG 16, it's included. And yeah, and the basic the human rights standards, of course. And yeah, the leave no one behind principle is addresses inequality in many SDGs. So I already mentioned most of those, but also no poverty, also the SDG 2, you could also be included here, no hunger. And SDG 8, very important also for us in the Hunger Project, decent work and economic growth is key, especially when it comes to agricultural work for women. Okay, next. Yeah, okay, how did I go with my time, with my 10 minutes? I think I took less time, which is very good because it gives us more time for the interview and to hear from Irene and Surbhi.
Great, thank you, Vincent, for this presentation also. And I think that this kind of sums up a bit what the SDG and how the SDG indicators also are connected to gender equality. And I'm now very excited to also invite our 2 speakers, Irene and Surbhi, to also bring in the Hunger Project's perspective on how we work with these indicators, right? Also, our programs don't just focus on gender issues, but also look at other SDGs to ensure that we can all live in a world without hunger. So women at THP, girls and women, I must say, are definitely viewed as important actors for us of transformation and also change. And the 3 R's that you mentioned, Vincent, resources, rights, and representation. We will also discuss this when we ask Surbhi and Irene what role they play in our programs. And so I would like to now invite also Vincent to join me in the questions to Irene and Surbhi. And perhaps we can start with Surbhi first. So we talked about the topics of gender equality briefly and also women's empowerment. and the role they play in our programs at the Hunger Projects, really worldwide. So we have from Surbhi from South Asia, Irene from Africa, but we also have programs in Latin America. And gender equality is for us also a necessary foundation, a foundation for making progress across the SDG goals and also for reaching a world without hunger. And yet we see that, or we have heard that women still face many barriers in progress, and they're also disproportionately affected by hunger. So in essence, we cannot leave women behind if we want a world without hunger. But before we talk about maybe some of the solutions and what we do with women, let's perhaps talk first about the challenges. So of course, each context in each country is a little bit different, but what would you say are the top 3 challenges in India and Uganda that women face in achieving gender equality? And why do you think, perhaps connected to that, that the progress is slow?
Hi, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Surbhi from India. I am the Communications Officer at PhD India. Before I actually jump into challenges, I think I would also like to start on a positive note and sort of speak of some of the encouraging narratives that we've seen in India in the last year or so. So recently, the long-awaited Women's Reservation Bill was passed, which provides 32% reservations to women in Parliament and State Assembly. We had the Chandrayaan, the moon landing, and that was a huge achievement in terms of how behind the scenes it was literally the women scientists who kind of held the whole production of that. We obviously also seeing in terms of increased women voters stepping out and participating in the electoral processes. Close to, I mean, recently we had 4 state government elections and 77% women stepped out to vote. So, which in itself says a lot about, the kind of spaces women are occupying. And at the same time, we see how India is also a context of huge contrasts. The fact that the reservation bill took, it required a 27-year struggle to reach this moment in history, says a lot about the way political decision making has been happening in the country, the lack of political will, and also it says a lot about the disparities that still exist, and how social norms are still keeping women out of the public domain. And to that, I would add the discriminatory patriarchal systems, the social norms, remain the biggest challenge, I think, not only in India, but across the world, but specifically in India, how they are still perpetuating the gender inequalities across political, social, economic realms. And if you combine that with and intersect that with the different actors of social categories like caste, class, religion, and other gender identities, we see how that decides who gets access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities, resources, and also kind of it says a lot about how young people, especially adolescent girls, are allowed to dream, the kind of ambitions and aspirations they can have. So yes, progress is slow, but I think it's probably the reason also why we need to do what we are doing more aggressively. Last 3 years, the pandemic, for example, and the kind of policies that came about, the way it was managed, really put development back many spaces. And we see how that crisis, kind of multiple crises as a result of that, exacerbated the existing inequalities. And we see that more clearly in the space of education, and especially education in rural areas. The learning gaps, the school dropouts, especially for children from the marginalized communities. But I think yes, there are challenges, but I think there is enough wisdom and there's enough work on the ground, there are enough movements on the ground that are really, really doing their best to kind of push the needle as much towards gender equality. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Surbhi.
Yes.
Yes. So is the acoustics good? Can everybody understand? Could everybody understand, Surbhi? I also forgot to mention that you may also type in any questions you have in the meantime, also in the chat function. We can collect them over time and go through them towards the end.
From Uganda, thank you so much, and greetings everyone. I'm Naikaali Irene, the country director at the Hunger Project Uganda. Not to divert so much from the situation in India, Uganda is facing really serious challenges when it comes to our progress towards achieving gender equality. And one of the biggest challenges that we are facing is the issue of the implementation of the policies. Government of Uganda has been very well recognized for drafting one of the best policies on the African continent. We subscribe to a number of international commitments around gender equality, and the policies are in place. But you realize that when it comes to the operationalization, not a lot of effort, not a lot of resources have been dedicated towards ensuring that, the legal frameworks and the support system around the implementation of these policies is in place. I can take an example of the land rights, the land policy in Uganda. It is very clear that within this land policy, the specific clause that talks about equal access to land, irrespective of gender, sex, and all that. But unfortunately, when it comes to women being able to access land, irrespective of the policy being in place, the leadership in place to be able to support this is not really very supportive and conducive for women to own land. And you realize that to be able to end hunger, there's no way women play a very important role. And if women don't have access to rights towards land, then our progress towards getting to gender equality becomes really a story. It becomes something that is really far-fetched. The other second challenge that we encounter is the shrinking civic space. Currently in the country, because of the turnaround of political events, we're seeing a lot of shrinking within the civic space. And with civic space, I basically we're referring to the political, the legal, the social and economic environment, which enables citizens to voice out their concerns, to come together, share common interests, influence, policies, influence discussions, and, come into dialogues around issues that really affect them, for the policymakers and the legal and our elders or political leaders to be able to pick on those issues, and they guide the discussions or the influence now to amend policies. But you realize that with the shrinking of the civic space, people's safety is not guaranteed. As you might have heard recently, the Human Rights Commission had to close its offices in Uganda and shift at the command of the government. And all this, of course, without proper, a conducive environment where human rights are upheld. You find that it becomes so difficult for the whole agenda towards gender empowerment to be achieved within the time frame that we are looking at. And thirdly, of course, we also faced with the cultural and social barriers, which are deeply entrenched within our patriarchal system. You realize that in Uganda, because of our so much focus, on the patriarchy and, the male-dominated patriarchal system that we operate upon within, the woman or the girl child is not really given a lot of priority when it comes to access to resources, when it comes to their rights being upheld. I can just give an example of in families, many parents would not feel comfortable, even those that talk about gender equality and having interest, in promoting gender equality. Many of them, when you sit down with them, they are not ready or willing to pass over their property, their family property, like land, to a girl child, to their daughters, because they believe, as part of our culture, girls are supposed to be given away into other families, and you wouldn't want to give your property to a girl child who is going to transfer that property to another family. So girls are actually looked at as also a source of property and wealth. So even so, when they go even to those other families where they get married, they're also looked at as immigrants. So if they're an immigrant, you're not entitled. So your relationship, your ability to have access to resources, productive resources, to be able to produce enough food, to be able to also engage in meaningful conversations or discussions and decisions around family dynamics, you're not really welcome to the table. And this is deeply entrenched within our culture. So these are some of the barriers that we are seeing to our really achieving gender equality, to our progress towards gender equality. And one of the things that I feel why we're having all these challenges, because these are things we always talk about, we know at the back of our mind that these are the challenges, but why are we failing to navigate through these challenges so smoothly, is because of the way, when you look at gender equality, it is a systems issue connected to so many components. And if you address one component, then you find that the other component also shifts. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge. Yeah. But of course that doesn't stop us from moving forward and finding solutions. Yep.
Thank you, Surbhi, for Irene. So I think the last point that you mentioned, Irene, sums it up a bit nicely. It's a systems issues, and the way that I gather from your answers, it's really an interconnected system that we need to look at when we talk about the challenges. So we're hearing the political policy level, the operational level that is slow, even if political will is there, but also the access to resources and the social system or the social space that we have, that we live in, which is made up of our patriarchal system, that also greatly affect the social and cultural norms and how we behave with women in our society, with our daughters, with our sisters, with our mothers, etc. So thank you for highlighting that to us, and for showing also again the interconnectedness and the dependencies of these inequalities in the systems.
Yeah, let's come to our next question, which is based on our mission statement. Maybe most of you know that the Hunger Project, the Global Hunger Project, has reformulated our mission statement this year. And in it says that one of our main goals is to transform systems of inequality. And one of those systems, obviously, is always has been for many, many decades at the forefront of our programs, is gender inequality. So the question to you, this time, Irene, maybe you may start to answer it. Why is gender equality essential to sustainably ending hunger?
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. I can pick it on from my last statement of where I said that when you look at the issue of gender equality, it is a systems issue beyond just the surface of, speaking about gender equality. This is what we want. They are deep-rooted issues that actually interconnected. And when you break them down, one of them is hunger in itself. When you unpack the issue of hunger, you realize that there's a role women and men play in ensuring that the household is food secure. So hunger becomes one of actually the components of gender equality. And at the Hunger Project, we believe in three major pillars. Our work revolves around three major pillars that we believe when we work around these pillars, we can sustainably move towards achieving gender equality, and also at the same time you can work towards ending hunger. And these three pillars actually directly linked, or they are directly linked in a systems perspective. They're directly linked to gender equality. One of the pillars is women empowerment. If you're talking about gender equality and you look about the empowerment of the women, what is the role a woman plays if she's empowered in relation to ensuring that her household is food secure, in ensuring that there is sustainable end of hunger? A woman being given that space to be able to co-create, to be able to participate productively in the production process and participate in the decisions that contribute to the nutrition of her household, of her children, and also ensuring that her community and her nation education, become a food basket, are all tailored towards her empowerment. And of course, this looking at some of those unfair issues around unfairness, some unfair systems that may block her from having this voice. So at the Hunger Project, empowerment of women is looked at as a very key issue in trying to work around the issues of hunger and, of course, gender equality. Then we also look at the other system issues, the issue of community, and the fact that to be able to achieve gender equality, there's an aspect of community, there's an aspect of working together. Equality is about two parts. You're looking at there's this part, how do we bring them together so they can jointly contribute towards ending hunger? So we believe that within the communities where we work, we have to create a situation, and we have to create an environment where both men and women come together, work together, come to the table and contribute meaningfully. So we always emphasize so much the concept of community mobilization and creating a common vision for the community to be able to understand that each of us, if we work collaboratively, we can be able to end our own hunger. And that is tailored to gender equality. Then lastly is also the pillar on collaboration and partnership building. We believe that even if you have gender equality, there are certain things within, as we're looking at the system, there are so many things that are connected around the system. And we believe that when you look at the man and the woman, irrespective of the competencies and the skills they may have, there could be other structural issues that may be beyond them. And this is where collaborations, partnerships with government, with other stakeholders comes in, because they need to be supported. We cannot achieve gender equality if we don't have collaborations and partnerships to ensure that the resources are there, to ensure, just as when we work with communities, we create awareness around gender equality, but there's always that next step. Okay, fine. Now we don't have the money to do this. We don't have the money to set up a food bank. That is where now their collaborations with government, with development partners comes in. So to be able to achieve, when we look at the connection between gender equality and ending hunger, it is really so system oriented. And when we look at it in that perspective and explore, for the case of the Hunger Project, those three pillars help to position us and give us that thinking. How are we able to not only focus on just this one area, but how do we bring in the other perspectives so that we are able to address this, and then eventually we see ourselves moving towards gender equality and sustainably ending hunger.
Thank you, Irene.
Yeah.
And Surbhi, let's hear from you and your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Irene, and so I would not repeat most of it. I mean, I would reiterate, in fact, that yes, gender equality is central, in fact, to all SDGs, not only hunger. We know, and in fact, when Vincent was talking about the percentage of women in agricultural labor force, in India, actually 75 to 80%, women who are actually who account for substantial proportion of agricultural labor force, and which includes informal work. It also includes bulk of unpaid care, domestic work. And so, yeah, women are really like sort of the foundation of who produces our food and who grows our food. And unfortunately, the structural barriers and social norms are still very much deeply embedded, and they continue to restrain women's effective participation in decision making in the households and in the communities. I mean, they remain excluded from accessing land, credit, agricultural inputs, markets in a large way. So yes, it's high time we actually recognize women's role and contribution in how they are talking about nutrition and food security, and listening to the local solutions that they are providing. And not only because they bring something to people, I think what I would also like to argue here, that gender equality, yes, it is essential to sustain, to be able to sustain sustainably end hunger. But I think it's not so much about only what they bring to the table, but also them as critical entities and identities in their own right, because gender equality is also about women's human rights, and that's the right thing to do. And in that, I would also like to just add that often when we talk about SDGs, we end up only seeing, I think, sometimes how gender equality is the driver for sustainable development. And so in that process, it becomes a means to an end. And I think we need to kind of rebalance that conversation around how we're looking at gender equality and empowerment as explicit goals in themselves as well. Because when we talk of hunger, what perpetuates hunger in the first place? And there's so many violent systems of oppression at play, capitalism, colonialism, we're seeing how it's still alive in so many ways. Racism. In India, caste is a massive problem, and it disproportionately impacts women and girls. So yes, I think when we're talking about gender equality, we also have to address these larger systems of violence at play for women and girls to be able to, so that they can live healthily and they can live dignified lives and do decent work, not only work because that's what they need for survival, but also work because that's somehow linked with their aspirations of growth. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You made, both of you made very clear the interconnectedness of gender equality with not only ending hunger, but all the other issues on the transformation agenda. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we talked about a lot of the barriers and challenges. So perhaps we can now dive into some of the program work on the ground in Uganda and India, and look at how hunger, poverty, and gender inequality are often intrinsically linked. And how or what have you experienced in breaking this cycle when you look at your programs on the ground?
I'll start. Yeah. So yes, as we've been talking, hunger is not gender neutral. More women and girls go hungry in vulnerable households. In the Indian context, we also see often whose needs are prioritized. And if there is short supply, we see women end up either eating very little or last, or end up actually skipping entire meals. So one way we've been trying to address this through the program interventions in India is precisely through the core strategy, which is to promote women's leadership and their participation in local village councils and interventions in deciding the local development agendas. And over a period of time, we have seen critical change and transformation on the ground. For instance, as part of their mandate, elected women representatives, they work at three levels. First is raising awareness in terms of disseminating crucial information about food ration schemes, nutrition, and other government schemes that kind of cater to ensuring food security. At the second level, we have the way elected women are sort of also ensuring that the government initiatives are functioning smoothly. For example, we have the creche systems in the villages, which cater to lactating and pregnant women and adolescent girls and children. So we have health checkups, regular health checkups that happen, and also take-home rations that are given at the creche center. So they ensure that these are running smoothly, that the Anganwadi, as they're called in Hindi, the workers are coming on time, there are no leakages, and similarly with the midday meal schools, which is another government initiative across states, where that's another way of making sure that, for example, children are able to attend schools. It's a way to encourage children to attend schools as well. So midday meals, healthy midday meals, hot preparations are made. At the third level, we have the community, the behaviors of community changing. So elected women are helping set up kitchen gardens. And this has come up in a huge way in Madhya Pradesh, which is one of the states we work in central India. 775 kitchen gardens were set up, which allowed diversification of food grown and consumed locally, and in a way also reducing dependence on markets, given high inflation at the moment. Elected women representatives have been working at different levels to ensure food security in some ways or the other becomes the norm. Another intervention I would like to speak of is the mothers committees that were activated in the same state of Madhya Pradesh, It has been a state government initiative for a few years, but during COVID, they kind of became defunct. The THP India then realized that, oh, there's something that we need to do. And so we facilitated that space where we ensured the active participation of adolescent girls, women, pregnant women, lactating and young mothers, and also women with mothers with malnourished children. So what we see in action as a result, and something that is continuing, is a nutritional governance at the local level with panchayats, that is the village councils, responding to the needs of the community, linking them to the government schemes on food security, livelihood opportunities, again linking women to different loan schemes, and other safety nets. And so this is how we are trying to break the cycle, so to speak. We continue to create safe spaces of learning, accessing knowledge, information. Also to keep in mind that this is a context which has poor infrastructure still in the rural areas and as a fragmented information system. And another way we continue to do this is to make sure that elected women use an intersectional lens to ensure that no one is left behind when they're trying to ensure that the last mile delivery takes place. Yeah.
Thank you. And Irene?
Yeah, from Uganda perspective, I will probably take the perspective of land rights, where we all know that land is central in the production process, and land is a center for land is access to land, or owning land is central to power and influence. So in a scenario where women are not able to have access to land, then we look at issues of hunger and poverty really becoming really a serious issue to deal with. When women have secure rights over land, you find that the power dynamics tend to shift. They are able to also meaningfully participate in decisions of their homes, and they're able to make decisions on who and how to feed their children and nutrition aspects, and eventually the whole family and the whole nation kind of moves towards gender equality. But on ground, if I can give an example of our recent trip to the northern part of the country, Amuru district, which was one of the districts that was heavily affected by the 20 years of the Lord's Resistance Army. We had a conversation with one lady called Katie. Katie was kidnapped during the Lord's Resistance Army war, civil war, in the 80s, on her way from school. She was about 12 years. She was kidnapped and taken away by the rebels to South Sudan. And when she reached South Sudan, of course, she had to give birth to children. And she was married off to one of the rebels, gave birth to 4 children. So during the liberation, when government tried to liberate some of these girls that had been kidnapped, she was one of those that were lucky to return home. But when she returned home, of course, her family didn't receive her, much as they were happy to see their daughter back. And I'm talking about now the brothers, because the parents had been killed during the war. So the brothers who had managed to survive the war were not willing to take her back. But the major reason why they weren't willing to take her back is because she had come along with these children who had been born, out of, during the war, and they belong to the rebels. These are children of the rebels. So they always reminded them about that civil, that process, that war. So when we met this lady, she had gotten married to another man who incidentally had also been killed because of poaching. I think he had gone out to fend for the family in a game reserve, and he was killed. So she had to stay at the family of this new husband who she had 2 children with. But when we reached there, this lady didn't even have food to feed the children. She told us the last bag of posture that she had gotten exhausted. And we're like, but you have all this land. Why can't you get involved in agriculture? She said, they didn't give me access to the land. When I came in here with my other 4 children that I gave birth from the bush, they only told me they're only giving me a hut, small space to set up a hut. And when it comes to food, I have to go and rent out land or do manual work for the community so that I can be able to do what? To grow some food. So at the moment, it's a dry season, and I mean, it's a wet season, and everybody wants their land. So you would see the pain on this lady's face. The children were all looking at her. They're still young. We need food. One of them was actually sick, but she had nothing to do because she couldn't really go. And at the moment, the land, she didn't have any access. So when you look at all these dynamics, and this lady Katie is representing quite a number within Amuru district, and you realize that, you know, at a certain point, you're like, what do we do? The issue of access to land is very, very instrumental. It's very key, you know, in addressing issues of poverty and hunger, especially in the rural context. And as Hunger Project, probably made, that's what have we done? We are looking at it now from this perspective where now you have this cultural patriarchal mindset coupled with the trauma of the war. How are we able to address that? We are trying to look at the economic perspective. How can we empower these women economically? How can we work with the private sector and provide them with simple loans or micro loans where they can be able to save and do something, maybe try to generate some income from them for themselves to be able to acquire land, for their own. Because when you ask around for all of them, the issue is, if I had land, my children would not starve. Secondly, we're also working around the collaborations and partnerships with the religious leaders and the cultural institutions who are the custodians of these cultural systems or norms that actually holding back the whole move towards, you know, attaining gender equality. So as Hunger Project, we've integrated them into our partnership stakeholder mapping and seeing how we can develop, you know, co-create and develop programs that can integrate and, you know, shift the mindset of these people to get them to realize that, you know, yes, the culture is important, but we can work around the culture and look at the emerging trends and see how to balance up the culture so that we are not running away completely, but we are also addressing the emerging trends, the issues that are at hand, without really paying a deaf ear onto this. So that is how we are trying to juggle around these issues that we are really encountering in the communities.
Thank you very much for both of your insights. I mean, these were just very, very different, but very similar examples, I have to say. I mean, in Surbhi's case with India, we heard a lot about women, local political representatives in panchayats that put the hat on when it comes to representing the needs of their communities and influencing the local development agenda, and raising awareness of food schemes, food programs, women's health programs, nutrition through kitchen gardens, etc. And in the example of Uganda that Irene highlighted so well, we also have the rights issue again at the forefront, giving women access to food, reducing poverty also is tightly linked to securing land rights, especially in rural areas. So thank you for highlighting for us those links.
Yeah, and your examples really made very clear and were great examples of, at the Hunger Project, we always see women as important agents of change and transformation. And promoting women's leadership is therefore an essential core element of all our programs. Yet from the local to the global level, women's leadership and social, economic, and political participation are restricted. We have seen those facts. And women are underrepresented as voters as well as in leading positions, whether in elected office and also including the civil service, private sector, or academia. So based on your experience, Irene and Surbhi, so why is strengthening women's leadership essential for change and transformation? And what kind of impact can be achieved in promoting women's leadership from your experience?
I can to respond to that question, I can use the definition of women leadership that I came across, which says that it's a process of social influence in which women harness their unique natural skills and strength into enlisting the aid and support of others in accomplishment of a common task or effecting change. Within this definition, I pointed out three things: the unique skills, the competencies, and the strength. So this definition actually points us to the fact that both men and women have unique skills, unique competencies, and strength, that if we harness on this uniqueness, on these competencies, then we can effectively be able to transform and attain gender equality in a very collaborative manner. And when it comes to the impact that I believe we shall be able to achieve, if we look at it in this way, in relation to what each gender brings to the table, I will also sum it up using the African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. We need each other to be able to make the changes that we are aspiring for.
The way I would like to answer this question is, I would talk about the kind of impact that women leadership has made at the local level in villages, which will kind of tell us precisely why we need leadership, why we need to strengthen women's leadership. And so in this work spanning over 2 decades now for PhD India, we see time and again, and we hear time and again how the kind of focus that women bring to certain issues has been or was always lacking the way the elected male representatives looked at development, and especially the way women are advocating for rights. And I think this also kind of ties up to PHP's inputs in terms of the training and the leadership workshops that we conduct, which are very crucial elements and foundational to the kind of pathways then women take once they are elected to public office. So going back to the kind of impacts that can be achieved, I will again give examples from the program interventions, and we have documented strong evidence of what happens when women lead as public office holders, how legacies are shaped, because we've also seen examples of adolescent girls kind of aspiring to becoming elected women representatives after seeing the kind of change so they're coming up as role models and mentors in their communities with the kind of work they're doing. They are shattering social myths about who can lead. They are redefining grassroots development and leadership. They're also reimagining the idea of development. Who it's meant for and whose voices are centered when they are planning budgets, when they are planning their annual work planning. And so in many ways they're calling for this radical shift in structural power relations as they occupy public office. For example, in Rajasthan, we see an intergenerational dialogue sort of playing out with elected women representatives and adolescent girls, working together for 5 years. And in the end, they end up building a college, in one of the districts where access to higher education was very difficult and a lot of girls were dropping out. So that is one example of how they were able to mobilize adolescent girls, and adolescent girls were able to kind of put forward their concerns and challenges with regard to education. In Uttarakhand, which is hilly terrain in the north of India, we see the elected women's federation fighting really hard to conserve forests and local ecosystems through one panchayats, which are the forest councils. In Karnataka, we see women leaders proactively taking steps to hold the doctors and the hospital workers accountable, especially towards pregnant women's health. So that has improved, health checkups at these hospitals and also primary healthcare centers. So from one election to another, what we are seeing is an evolution in the kind of language that the elected women are using, a change in their attitudes, a language which is shaped by a strong consciousness of their own constitutional rights, that they have a right to contest elections, and then how it gets translated to pushing development agenda, which goes beyond building roads and really talking about issues of social justice and equity, not even equality, equity. And again, I would like to bring in the trainings and the capacity building workshops that PhD organizes, because without that, you can have the representation. You know, women will, because there is reservation, they will get elected and come to office. But what then? And that's where, you know, THP's role comes in, where they're making sure that women are using their voices, they're making choices, they're engaging with systems, bureaucrats, police, media, and several other stakeholders, and taking risks when they know that the consequences are very unfavorable. The kind of backlash these women face and the violence these women face in villages is it's like a horror film sometimes, because you know, their caste plays a massive role. And for example, the Dalit, which is one of the lowest castes in India, those elected women representatives really face a very, very difficult time in trying to even sometimes get water to their communities, because water is such a hugely contested issue and caste is a massive barrier there. So what we are seeing is a context of an empowerment, which is literally these daily acts of resistance. And I think in that sense, political empowerment is extremely integral and indispensable when we're talking about realizing gender equality. And when we see these women present in public office, they're also democratizing the public spaces. They're pushing the envelope and really talking about inclusive change. And yeah, so I think when we see these examples, we feel like it's important to and to continue talking about women's leadership and strengthening it and building it and ensuring there is an enabling environment also. The two things, you build their strengths, but you also build an enabling environment in which they can function effectively. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for these very impressive examples of our work in Uganda and India. I'm really again and again moved very, very deeply by these examples of what women actually, the potential, if it's unleashed, what women leaders are doing in their communities. Very impressive. Thank you. And now we come to our last question. Yeah, and let's speed up a little bit because we still want to have a few minutes for question and answers. And I want to remind everybody to post your questions into the chat, please.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so yes, coming to the final question, and you can keep your answers fairly short so that we can then start right with our Q&A. So now when it comes to Germany and countries in Europe, but also the global community, what can be further done to support your endeavors in advancing gender equality? Any final words for us?
Yeah, I would just say long-term, flexible, sustained funding. You know, that's the key actually right now to getting any kind of work done for a long time, because these are issues that have been active for centuries. So we would require time to undo them in ways that they are long-lasting. And also in the face of political repression and the fact that there is an anti-rights agenda actually across the globe, but also in India on a rise. You know, so the funding that is it's tangible because of the kind of change it brings, but it's also intangible in the sense that it helps build knowledge, you know, build spaces, sort of build movements and cross-movement solidarity. Because as Irene also said, you know, all of these are interconnected. So we need to be functioning on different fronts parallelly, simultaneously. And just one last thing, I think this is also an important opportunity to reframe the larger dialogue around resourcing women's rights and girls' rights, and really take this call of action seriously. And so this needs to happen, I think, in direct conversation with how we're talking about power, how we're talking about money, and also in all of this, in direct conversation with the voices of the historically marginalized and vulnerable people. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. When the support that would want our colleagues, our development partners in Europe to support us in advancing the move towards gender equality is that we would want to see our development partners also getting into that space where they are able to do political economy analysis to understand some of the deeper issues behind the development challenges that we're facing. Most of the time, we tend to look at the technical side, the symptoms, but without going deeper. And when you look at this issue of gender equality, there's an element of power dynamics involved. And so if I can just give an example, much of the conversations around, much of the debates, when you look at now in country like in Uganda, you tend to, when you get into the spaces with other stakeholders when discussing issues of gender equality, you tend to feel the conversation being drifted so much to look at to interpret gender equality in terms of competitiveness and entitlements. And so we would want our development partners to also to support us in changing, renegotiating the narrative around gender equality, to look at it in terms of equality with rights and complementarity. Because if you look at it with equality with rights and complementarity, then you're able to address the power dynamics within. And eventually we are able even to go deep and look at the cultural issues and how to influence them. So we need to, and also as a global community, we also need to be very intentional in making this happen. There are usually 6 conditions that they talk about that need to be looked at when you're to change anything in a systems approach. And many of these, most of these 6 conditions rotate around 3 major levels. One is the structural level, where now you look at the policy environment, that the power dynamics and the resource flows. Then you look at the relationship issues. You look at then the transformational aspect down there. It also has the mental models. So when we are looking at designing projects or addressing targeting funding, we need to ensure that the funding, as we are designing these programs, they're kind of addressing this whole picture. Because what has been happening is that we tended to be narrow focus. You find that probably as Hunger Project, we may have concentrated so much on the transformational bit, where we're looking at the mental, the mindset and all that, but forgetting the structural bit of it. So it is really time for us to really think out of the box and think in terms of the system, because all the things are interconnected. One success here may lead to unintended results in another area. So that would be my perspective and my request.
Great. So ending on a positive and passionate speech. Very good. Thank you for your final insights. The project that Surbhi just mentioned with the women elected representatives is also currently a project that we at THP Germany financially support, as well as BMZ. And we're also planning another new project in Uttarakhand with the India team. And with Irene and the Uganda team, we are also planning a program that also supports young men and women and hopefully gaining more access to agricultural resources, markets, microcredit loans. So we're very, very excited to work with both of your teams on doing whatever we can to also support this issue. And just to our audience, I just want to say we also welcome your support and commitment. This Christmas season, we all want to put a focus on not leaving any girls and women behind. So we just invite you to be also part of this movement and to continue to invest in our programs for women and girls. And we highly, highly appreciate all that you have done so far for this support and in helping us to continue to do this. I would just like to very warmly thank Irene, Surbhi, and Vincent for their contributions today. Thank you very much for taking the time, for sharing with us, for giving us insights. We highly appreciate your presence. And
let me just also add to your the investment funding for the Hunger Project is one thing, but also I want to invite everybody to contribute to our advocacy work, where we have it on the top of our agenda. With this window of opportunity, I like to call it, that we have in Germany right now with this feminist development policy, we have a great opportunity to make a very high impact with our advocacy work. So you are very much invited to contact us, contact me, and participate in that work.
Yeah, that's pretty very important. I also wanted to point it out. We show some links later where you also can support like the THP India directly in their social media channels and everything, and just raise the voices digitally and analog. But I wanted to ask also a question to Surbhi, to India. And you mentioned the case system a lot. And is it like if you're working on female empowerment, are you at the same time like making this case system or a little bit more how do you call it? Or are you solving this case system a little bit for the women also if you do the work for the female empowerment, or is it something different?
Yeah, I mean, so caste system is basically goes back to thousands and thousands of years, and it kind of divides the population into different castes. So there are higher castes who do a certain job, and there are lower castes who do certain job. So because it's kind of rooted in the religious scriptures as well, it is something that is so pervasive that anybody trying to, like even today in villages, for example, if Dalit, which is the lowest caste, scheduled caste, if they are trying to, say, get water or enter temples, they will be beaten to death. And this is not something that used to happen 20 years ago, 50 years ago. It's happening now in Rajasthan, in different states, in MP, where or they do very menial jobs. And even within the village space, a lot of these tribes and castes, they live outside the main sort of village boundaries. So yes, when I say we're working for women's empowerment, we are looking at women across categories, and therefore the intersectional lens becomes equally important. In fact, super important, because women again are not homogeneous groups. So the way a Dalit woman or an indigenous woman would face access to water and hunger would be very different from, say, a woman poor but from a higher caste. Because also the way the villages are constructed or built, often water resources are closer to the higher caste village households. So a lot of Dalit women, and they have to walk miles to access water. So I think it will not solve, but it will address. And I think to completely do away with caste system and annihilate caste system, as Dr. Ambedkar would talk about, who was one of the drafters of the Constitution of India. It requires a different kind of political will and a lot of social change in the mindsets, because even today in urban sort of spaces, in households like mine, not mine but like mine, it is practiced in very subtle ways, and so yeah, it is something that we take very seriously when we are trying to focus on women's leadership. And that's what the reservations do. They reserve 50% seats for women, but within that, they reserve seats for Dalit and Adivasi women, the indigenous women. So they get an opportunity to actually contest elections and get their voices heard and get their issues resolved. So that's why reservations and quotas are so important when we're talking about political empowerment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. One chart which I already announced, with more links to the Hunger Project Germany, to the Hunger Project Uganda, to the Hunger Project India's work, videos. I will also we will also put these links in our article on our website, which we are putting on the website after we uploaded the video and everything. So you find them there too, and you can find lots more of information about female empowerment, the projects, and how to contribute also to the important work of THP India and THP Uganda via maybe THP Germany. So yeah, check it out and yeah, see all the projects we have and how you can help and engage. And yeah, thank you. And Suna,
Yes. Yes, that just leaves me with the final words to wish everyone, a very quiet, blissful holiday season, Christmas season for those of you who are celebrating, and have a great start into the new year. Thank you for your continued support, for your interest in our webinars, and for participating. And thank you again to our speakers. We very much appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having
So have
us.
a good day. And yep, we'll be in touch with our next webinars.
So let's say
Bye.
goodbye in our local language. Auf Wiedersehen.
Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen. Vielen Dank.
Evening.
Bye.
Great, bye-bye.